Hi, folks, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Vita Vicente podcast. Yeah, you got it right, it's the 20th episode. It's a nice number, and to be even nicer, since I'm about to chat to Manny Torres, an American author who doesn't hesitate to use violence and strong image in his novels. So don't go away, and you'll hear the man himself. And I hope you enjoy it and give us a thumbs up. It's very helpful to distribute the content. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it. It's also a great way to support my stuff. So see you in a sec. Hi, Manny. Welcome to my podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's nice to be talking from such a distance apart.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the 21st century, that we have these tools. We can thank technology that we can interact with others that will be nearly impossible, say 20 years ago, if not earlier.
Yeah.
So, if you don't mind, just as a starting point, I know I prepared an intro and people are already aware of who you are, but I think it's always better if the guest can add some stuff and do your own introduction. So if you can self-introduce you know, that would be a great beginning.
Of course. My name is Manny Torres. I currently reside in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. My parents were Puerto Rican. I have lived in Puerto Rico too. I lived in Atlanta about 10 years. I came here to make independent films and be an artist. And I went through everything that goes with all of that. And I've managed to establish myself as a writer, as a crime writer. I've had a few novels out. Dead Dogs was my first published novel. Seems to be the most popular book that I've written. And since then, I've had a few others. But I'm more of a writer than anything else. You know, I'm involved with photography and filmmaking and painting, but writing is my forte. It's what I do the most now and where I'm focused.
Okay, so you say that your main focus or the prominent figure among the different hats is writing. When did you start writing and why? If there was a why, because sometimes it's not that obvious.
Oh, yeah. Well, I always tell people when I was a kid, I used to break into like spontaneous poetry. And then my grandmother one day was like, oh, that kid, he's going to grow up to be a poet. And I never really considered it. I like to read. I like to watch films as well. And I see writing as like when I write, I'm participating in the conversation of that creative thing. I didn't get to be the best illustrator or painter that I wanted to be. So by writing, I can express myself best. What I couldn't put on paper or what I couldn't paint. I have more power and more control of what I'm creating when I write, because I want the words to paint images for the reader. I started writing. I guess I should mention that I'm multilingual, and English was not my first language. So there was the learning curve of learning how to speak English, and then learning how to write it, learning how to read it. So once I got past that and I figured out what it was, when I was a teenager, I didn't write poetry, but I wrote short stories and I knocked out novels as a kid really fast for some reason. I still do that. I can knock out a novel in a short amount of time as long as I know what the story is. So as a teenager, I got started writing science fiction and horror.
Just one curiosity, what is a short amount of time for you to finish a novel? Because they have to be very subjective from writer to writer.
True. Short time for me is 1 to 3 months.
That's very short.
Yeah, usually about 45,000 words is a novel for me. And I can usually do that. I've been stuck a little bit here and there on the stuff that I'm working on, but that's usually the time frame for me to write something.
And why you think you are that fast? Is it the way you organize your time? It's how you use your creativity? What is it?
I type really fast. I can either sit down with a pen and a notebook and sort of get this, like, kind of get possessed by what I'm writing and then lay it all out. So it's a journey at that moment. I think I become the characters, and so I write it all. If you've ever seen the movie based on Stephen King's book, The Dark Half, when they show him, with the character as a writer, and when they show him writer, he goes into a trance with a piece of paper and a pencil, and he scribbles his entire book, and only he can read it, And I feel that, I think I don't scribble like he did, but it's close to that. It's this sort of being taken over by the art and I'm the vessel through which that project comes through. And it's something I've developed since the age of 14. I'm 51 now. So since 14, I've put in those hours of writing, editing, because once you write it, you spend the rest of the time. Like, if I can finish a book in a month, it will be 2 years before the book is ready to be published.
Yeah.
So that's my approach to that creativity, and it's something I've developed over many years. Yeah. It's worked for me. So.
And what is also interesting, and at least that's my experience, that sometimes the person that is the person that wrote the book is not the same that will edit. Because let's say, as you said,
right,
1 year have passed, and a lot of things have impacted you, as a human being. So you might, so that you might have changed perspective, let's say, about society, or about love or death, but your sensitivity, it's different. Let's say you care more about certain things, you think others matter more, and you're going to put different passion, or you're going to get into detail in a way you wouldn't, or the other way around. So in a way, as you said, if the book is written in 2 years, it's written by a few different people that belong to one.
Yeah, I've got really good editors that I work with at the publishers, and they've been very helpful. Paige Johnson is my editor at Outcast Press, and she knows exactly what it is that my book is missing, and she'll give me those, and she'll suggest those ingredients, and I add them, and it really works. But also, you have to allow the work to transform. So if I was going to give a little bit of advice to a writer, it's like, well, write everything you want to say, and then set it aside, let it, ferment for a while, go back to it. If something's not working, change it, remove it, So yeah, you're right. From the moment that it's finished, written in its raw stage, until it finally sees publication, there's been a big transformation that's happened. And that's supposed to happen.
Yeah. So what makes a writer a writer? I reckon it's not only publishing books. Like, what's your view on what a writer is?
That's a good question. That's a big question. Someone who can express what's inside, speak on behalf of others, I guess, in the sense that like I can put myself in other people's shoes and see what they're going through, so I can write from that perspective. Putting into words what you observe. I think a lot of writers spend time living and observing, having conversations that become a body of work, or that becomes part of the story that you're writing. Even though most writing is biographical, I hold to that. I also, most of my stories are other people's stories, things that people have told me, things they've experienced, things I've observed, and so those characters that I've created, most of them are real life people. I've just changed them a little bit, changed their names, but their situations are pretty straightforward. I think most of my books that I've written, a lot of those stories have occurred in some way.
So there is a social aspect, which is sitting with others, listening to what's going on in their lives, and somehow bringing to the books. Maybe there is something about it. We just don't transfer without adding, any elements, some of your imagination, or some things that will make it more interesting. Probably it's not just going from A to Z. There are things happening on the way that will make it more literature piece. So I see that your view of a writer is someone active, someone out and about, and not just sitting on the basement or on the top of the hill and watching the road. Like, you need a degree of socials to be a good writer. Am I correct?
To be a good writer, to make it genuine, especially dialogue, dialogue has to be real. Otherwise, it doesn't. It comes off as very false. Writing it can be a lonely task. I spent a lot of time in front of a computer typing.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time reading. I mean, I tend to be a private person anyway, so I don't really do much socializing. But you have to. I think you have to experience the world and everything. I remember in high school, I told a friend, like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna write. I'm gonna just write. I'm gonna go to college for a little bit, and then I'm gonna write." And she told me, "Well, you haven't really lived or experienced anything, so how can you write?" I'm like, "Well, I've experienced this thus far." But I got what she meant. And since then, obviously you go through all the stages of everything in your life that a human experiences, and that builds up your own personal character just as a person. But for a writer, it certainly creates a lot of kindle for creativity, for that fire of creativity. So yeah.
Yeah, so going back to something you just mentioned, which I think is very interesting, it's the dialogues. I would say the dialogues are one of the most challenging pieces when you're writing novels, because you are talking on behalf of the characters. It's not that, because I think it's much easier to be the one who is doing conducting the narrative. It's very hard that the narrative is being done by someone you don't identify with. It tends to be like relatively promiscuous, let's say, the relationship between the author and the one who is doing the narrative. With the characters, you need to be able to build that gap between yourself and John, Joe, and Mary and Anthony. It's a bit different. And also, going back to the thing you said, that you started to write, I think, in Spanish, then you switched to English. And I have like a serious issue myself, and I don't know if you can relate to this or not, or how much you went through, but I'll be very interested in knowing your experience. So I started writing in Portuguese for many years. I just started writing in English in Paraguay maybe 3 years ago during COVID. That was one of my COVID accomplishments. And one of the reasons why I started is when I write dialogues in Portuguese, they don't sound very much Portuguese, because I don't know how Portuguese people speak anymore, because I'm abroad for 18 years. And people have changed the social dynamics. There are different like jargons and slogans and day-to-day expressions that I'm not aware of, or maybe I use someone that doesn't make much sense. So for me, it started to be hard, especially to the dialogue. So is it something that you experience, let's say, when you write in Spanish, if you still do, or how is it your approach to speak, to write in Spanish, if you have to?
I don't speak as much Spanish as I'd like to, so it's out of practice and a little rusty. So, and when I grew up speaking Spanish, living in Puerto Rico, it was more of the elementary level. So when I hear the big words in Spanish, and especially in Puerto Rico, the dialect there is different than most other Spanish. Well, Caribbean Spanish, basically. Cubans and Dominicans share a similar dialect. But then there's also the whole people speak in a certain way in North Puerto Rico than they do in South Puerto Rico. And by the way, I have ancestry from Portugal too, that landed in Puerto Rico. So a good amount of my genetics come from the Iberian Peninsula. It was my struggle with writing just normal narration. He comes into the room, he sits down, blah, blah, blah. It was my difficult in writing that led me to let the characters speak. So there's a great, amazing crime writer. His name is George Higgins. He wrote The Friends of Eddie Coyle, and he wrote Coogan's Trade, which became the movie Killing Them Softly with Brad Pitt. So his books are known for huge chunks, huge pages and pages of just dialogue, of characters talking. And from those pages of dialogue, you start to see what the story is. And I ran with that idea. So my books are very heavy with dialogue because it's easier for the characters to speak and tell what the story is than me just sitting there going, they're going to rob these people in the street, things like that. And in dialogue, because I like to listen to people speak, and I love language. Like, I truly am in love with language, the origins, like the simple fact that in the Iberian Peninsula, you have a Portuguese language, you have the language that the Northern Spaniards speak, you have the language of the Southern Spaniards, which is what is spoken in Puerto Rico, and you have Italian, and you have French. When you know those basics, like I speak Spanish, I speak English, I speak some Italian, and I speak some French because of the familiarity of those. Portuguese was a bit of a challenge. Always had. I had family. I had family who was from Brazil, so there was a challenge in that. But I love the words, the origin of it. Like these, us as humans developed this method of speaking, and it's fascinating. So that is the starting point for creating a dialogue. And then I listen to vernaculars and I listen to dialects. They speak differently in New Jersey than they speak in Georgia. In Florida, it's a whole other thing. So that's where I gather the tones and the ideas and the subjects that the people speak of. That's how it comes. It's just from listening.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Like the accents are fascinating. Like one of the things I like about living in Ireland, it's a tiny country, especially for American standards, but even for European standards, it's quite small. But the amount of accents you can hear in Ireland, it's like endless. Like I don't know, like even within Dublin, there is north and south. There is even then within north and south, there are a good few. There is let's say the working class accent, there is the posh accent, there is the west accent, there is the accent mixed with some British flavor. It's huge, and I think, like for instance, in case of Ireland, is the fact that people lived in their communities, close communities for quite some time because there are not much influences from other countries. Like it's not like, let's say, Central Europe where everyone was everywhere. Here it's different, but because they stick to their own friends and family, they are almost built their own variation of English, which is, and it's interesting. Like it's also part of, let's say, go to County Kerry and you experience obviously the landscape, the coast, but also the accent. It's also part of the trip. And I would say in the US, you also have this thing. As I said, the New Yorkers will speak one way, then in Miami they'll speak different, and so on and so forth. So. Do you also enjoy that richness in America?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a, there's the interpretations of what a patriot is, and I'm certainly not a flag waving American patriot. For me, patriotism is having respect for your neighbors, and it truly is. The United States is the melting pot of the world. We have everybody here, and there's like 350 languages spoken in the United States alone. And unfortunately, I mean, it's I guess out of migrations has caused Spanish to be a second language, but outside of the indigenous people of the United States, we could have easily spoken German as a language or Spanish. When the Spanish had portions from New Orleans all the way up, it's called the Yazoo country, and the French also had part of that as well. So I think instead of trying to fight it here, it's saying that only one language to be spoken, I think it's a cultural obligation. You should speak a second language, in some way. Plus it makes you smarter and you get paid more at jobs if you're bilingual. So it's very.
You might get away with a further incentive with getting paid more at work. I think the others, I'm not sure they'll be persuading people with, but if there's money on the table, there'll be more people willing to do the effort. Yeah. And when I speak to Americans, I had like, I don't remember how many, but I had already like maybe 3 or 4, including yourself in my show, and I'm very happy to talk to you guys. And one thing that is always interesting for me is how do you see yourself as Americans? You said you're not a typical patriot, which is it's okay. I mean, as you said, everyone has their own perspective of belonging and identity and so on and so forth. But I think it's common knowledge, or that U.S. is the alpha country in the world. You are number one, like it or not.
Right.
Some can say that U.S. is in decline, but I don't want to go that route now. But at the moment, like U.S. is number one, And how does it feel for you to be born? I mean, you were born in Puerto Rico, but you are an American citizen. But how does it feel to be American? Because it's very different to be German or to be Canadian or to be Japanese, and there are other smaller countries. But to be American is by definition differently. So how does it feel to have that responsibility? If you like it.
I love that question. It's great. And just for the record, I actually was born in New York, in Brooklyn. But my father was born in Puerto Rico, but my whole family is from Puerto Rico. My mom was born in New York. It's funny. I always tell people, first and foremost, I see myself as a New Yorker before I'm American, because New York is its own country. It's its own beast. And I say that with lots of love. It's a great question. I think every American probably struggles with that question and what it means, because the amount of people who settled here, post-Columbian settlers, there was originally it was you had the Dutch and then the British and the French and the Spanish, in whatever order they showed up here. Those are the Europeans who arrived here. And then the wars that they had, the languages and cultures they established, gave way to what America was, say, in the 1800s. And then you had an influx of the Chinese, and then you had the influx of the Irish, um, the Scottish, um, and all those cultures here is what makes America great. This idea that America sucks because it's America. The only time America sucks outside of the shitty government, the only time America sucks is when you're in denial of all the cultures here. When people say, well, I want to celebrate America Day. When are we? You've got Black History Month. You have the Irish Pride Parade. You have the Puerto Rican Parade. Where's the American? So that's the thing. You are American. You get to celebrate Puerto Ricans. You get to celebrate Black culture. That's what it means to be American. For me, I love the multitude of cultures here. It makes me who I am, a mix of multiple cultures, from Iberian region, from Africa, from indigenous people from the island. That's what it means to be American, to embrace that culture. I don't go for this fraudulent idea of waving a flag around and like you said, being alpha about it. I'm like, I have no say in that. I mean, I vote, but it's about the cultures here for me to bring it back down.
But like it or not, it's a fact. It's how you are seen. Like if you go overseas as an American, you are seen as part of the house of countries. You might not recognize yourself, in that identity, in that way of thinking, but that's something that comes along with that. Like I was born in Portugal. That comes with some set of ideas that people have about the country. Like we, for instance, just in short, if I tell Inil that I'm Portuguese, everyone likes it because they think about the sunshine, they think about the good food. All their memories are positive. So it's an advantage. Actually, it took me time to understand. I don't necessarily use it because I'm not really like the hedonistic type, but it's a fact. It's a fact. It's something that, like it or not, you carry with you. So even though you are not that kind of American, you always be seen as part of the country number one, or the country that is on the top of the pyramid. And it's not about doing good or bad things. It's just they are the top of the pyramid. Some people see America as a savior. Some people see America as a predator. And I'm not saying what is correct here. It's just a fact that you guys are at the top.
Yeah, I understand that, and a good amount of Americans don't really feel that way. I think we're just trying to make do. There's a sense of everything that's wrong that can be right. So really, it's a struggle to make that thing right. Whether it's civil rights, women's rights, all that, it's still a struggle, and it's still a ridiculous struggle. So sometimes I stand back and go like, this is so stupid. But I never get the urge of going like, oh, well, I'm done. I'm leaving the country. No, I was born here. With respect to the indigenous people from here, this is where I was born. I love New York. I love the people there, and my mom had a way of getting along with other people just by sharing food with them. She may not have spoken their language, but she always was like, oh, that's similar to the food we have. Look at this. So I learned that from her, and that to me is what it is to be a New Yorker. Like, you have to live with every single culture of the world, and they're all your neighbors. And the United States is like that for the most part. But I see myself as like a New Yorker anywhere I go. And it's different. The way they do things in New York compared to the way they do things in Georgia, completely different. So
how do you distinct New York from Georgia and America in general? The only thing I know is that New Yorkers tend to be very much outspoken. So they don't hold themselves. They will share their opinion. Whatever they think, they have no constraint, to tell people.
That's one way of looking at it. I see being a New Yorker as like, oh, I don't understand what this guy is. I don't speak that Arab guy's language. I don't speak the Russian guy's language, but he's my neighbor. I go to his store and I pick up food and we say hello to each other. You know, that's how I approach everything. I mean, yeah, New York is fast. New York is fast paced, and there are people of their opinion. But there are, there's I think there's a myth about every single person. This idea of Southern hospitality and that people are really nice in the South. Yeah, I can vouch for that. They do things differently here culturally. The food is different. I guess it's a slower pace, is what they say to New York. I mean, New York is this big, and you pack 10 million people in there, so you got to move fast. You can't just stand there. You have to move. In the South, it's more sprawled. People are more laid back. There's more country, more nature.
Space, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's all different. And also, too, you have this thing where, say, for instance, Florida, which is a mutant of its own in the United States. A lot of people there are transplants from New York and New Jersey and from other places. So if you go there and you say, like, hey, this guy, I don't like this guy from Florida, but you're probably talking about a guy from New York who's obnoxious. So you have that weird thing that happens that you can only experience if you lived in New York and then you live in Florida, which I've lived in Florida, so I understand that. But the greatest thing that you could get out of the United States is all the culture. The culture.
Yeah. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Let me go back to your books, and you could just refer, maybe I don't like this guy because he's from Florida, blah, blah, blah. And one thing you use, going that route, is the violence. And I'm going to be very honest, I haven't read none of your books, but I'm very interested after I did some research about your stuff. I have a pile of books to read, writers.
Oh, I know, yeah. Me too.
So you can relate to that.
Yeah.
So why do you use violence? And is it something intentional? Is it something happened by accident? Can you share with us the usage of violence in your stuff?
Sure. I get that asked in almost every interview, and I'm happy to answer it. My stock answer is always, I am a pacifist. I'm a vegetarian. I can protect myself. I know how to fight if I had to. There's so many ugly things in the world, whether it's violence against women or children or animals, war. Those are things that I have found myself paralyzed in sadness and fear that I can't change any of it. I can change things within myself and within my surroundings to help to make the world better, but I cannot single-handedly fix those things. Violence scares me. It's repugnant. I use it as it's a knee-jerk response to the violence in the world because it is sickening. I happen to write about violent people. I grew up knowing drug dealers and people from South America who imported products to the United States. I was friends with them. I knew what they were doing. And it was scary. It was very scary. And I saw friends get beat up. I've seen friends die. So it is it's therapeutic for me to write violence. I will change the channel on certain violent things. I'm not a fan of watching violent things. I don't like horror movies. But the violence from me writing has come as it has arrived as an answer to the violence of the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think that's one of the best ways to use violence is through art. For sure, it's better than to use it on everyday life or to start a war or to do something stupid. Like, probably is one of the best benefits that writers and artists of all sorts have is to release some energies to a way that don't make any harm to the others and to the road and to themselves. Like I think it's at some point, like we all have some instincts that we don't know what to do with them, and if we have the ability to write, sometimes we just use that tool, the tool of writing, or if we paint, the tool of painting, or whichever is the art we are interested in. So yeah, I totally relate to that. And the other thing that I saw in one of your interviews, there are two writers that are vital for you as an author, and they're also vital for me. And they're both Americans. One is Charles Bukowski, which was a huge figure for me, especially when I was younger, in my 20s. It still is, because I think the guys who were your mentors when you were starting, even if you go different routes, they stay with you. So we can talk about that too. And the other one is William Burroughs, which is a fascinating writer. He's an absolute genius, and I think it's, at least in Europe, is a bit forgotten, is a bit neglected, and I think he would deserve more attention. So I would like you to tell me, what did you get from those two guys, and if you want to add some others, I think we can all benefit from that.
Absolutely, I could talk about those guys all day. And just to go back a little bit on the violence part, because everything in our existence as humans is an act of violence. You know, a plant sprouting in the morning is violent. Fires clear things out, grows a forest. It's part of our nature, so it goes without saying. But Bukowski and Burroughs, I was probably 20 when I read Naked Lunch, and I had been looking for this freedom in my writing, a release, because everything just felt very structured. You know, I was fascinated with Ray Bradbury, who I still love very much, and John Steinbeck and Mark Twain. Those are my favorite writers when I was a teenager. So when Burroughs came along, when I discovered that, it was just so free. There was no restraining in what he was writing. And I like to tell people that with every single book that I write, it really starts out like Naked Lunch. It's run on, it's messy, it has no plot whatsoever until I shape it, bring it back together. And then I do a thing with the dialogue that I call the Bukowski filter. I'm like, well, read that dialogue back to yourself and tell me, would Bukowski approve of that? Does it make sense? Because that's what I got out of Charles Bukowski, was not just his honesty, but the way people spoke in his stories are the way that people speak. People of that, of that level in society, they speak that way. And honestly, people misunderstand Charles Bukowski a lot. They think he's just some drunken guy writing about hookers.
Yeah.
The guy was really a Buddhist at heart. I mean, he had a Buddhist funeral. When he died, he was given a Buddhist procession.
Really? I didn't know that one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He had a Buddhist funeral.
Yes, he had a Buddhist funeral. And if you think about it and you look back, you're like, well, he was just living. He was living life as hard as he could. And that's it. Mm-hmm. It's like his living happened to have had a lot of drinking in it and womanizing, but he was living. You know what I mean? He understood the bullshit of life, and he was living it the best way that he could. And that really shows in his work. It's just very honest and raw. Out of almost any American writer, he was very honest in what he said. So those are the two guys that are huge impacts. Even to this day, I still look at them. It's like one on one shoulder, one on the other, looking down at me as I'm writing, even though I'm not writing topically like they did. Maybe I'd probably write more like Bukowski than William Burroughs, but William Burroughs could really write a sentence and really create an image in your head. It's fantastic. So yeah, I have the 5 Bs. Is Bradbury, Burroughs, Bukowski, J.G. Ballard, and Paul Bowles, who wrote
Oh.
The Sheltering Sky. Those are,
and they're all great.
yeah, they're big influences on me. And there's women too that influenced me. Patti Smith and Kathy Acker, and even Yoko Ono's poetry was influential to me. So, yeah.
Is Bukowski still that reputed with all the cancel culture in the US? Because he was a jerk, and there are people who wouldn't read his books because of his personality or things he did to women. You know, how is he perceived these days?
I was working at a coffee shop a couple of years ago. A lot of students from the nearby college would come there and hang out. A lot of self-professed feminist female students would come in, and I remember one she would always come in with a different Bukowski book every other week. I'm like, oh, you like this guy? And he's like, yeah, I mean, he's a little rough around the edges, but I got to see I got to see what's out there. Almost like saying, I'm learning about the toxicity that's out there through reading his books, which is okay. And I don't know that I've seen it called out a lot in cancel circles. And if anybody wants to ever challenge that, I present them with like, well, he was really a Buddhist at heart. If you read his later poetry, the stuff he wrote closer to his death, he was, he didn't just write about drinking or womanizing. That's the thing. That's the number one thing. And he's still a hero to a lot of people here in America. And I know a lot of Germans too, because he was born in Germany, and Europeans, so you have the people who may latch onto him and like, oh yeah, this is the drunken, crazy guy. Oh man, you should read these stories. But there's a lot of heart in every single one of those stories. No matter what he's writing about, he spoke of the truest, rawest, ugliest things that we experience as humans. And on a personal note, when I was in my early 40s and transitioning out of relationships, I found myself in situations where I'm like, shit, this is right out of a Bukowski story. So I felt that. And I wasn't like, oh, I'm so cool, I'm Bukowski. No, I was like, this is really messed up. And this is like Bukowski. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said, that writers should be able to express the human heart.
Yes.
That, let's say you are in the middle of a situation and you can relate to a book or to a movie, because or even to it happened to me, which is even more weird. I would say it's there were occasions that I felt I was part of a painting. Like I just look around and this could be a painting. This could be a representation of reality that really tells how human beings are, how we are wired, why we struggle, what we know and what we don't, and all the broken bridges between individuals. It's I had a couple of occasions like that. It's when your life is visual, when there are so much, the images start to erupt, around you, and you feel that you are part of a wider story.
Yeah. The idea of the title "Naked Lunch," when I think it was something Allen Ginsberg said to William Burroughs about when you look at the end of your fork and you see the thing that you are gonna consume, you see the reality of what that is. It's that same idea of expressing what it is to be alive. That's what it is. What it is to be alive.
Yeah.
And all your feelings.
Yeah. It's all down to that, isn't it? Like what it means to be alive? What are we here for? How do you face finitude? It's in the end, it's all about that. Even though, if you think about all your problems, even like stupid problems with your neighbor, with your landlord, with the bus driver, they're all part of a larger image, or a larger picture, and it almost always communicates to how you feel about life. If you know what you are doing, or if you have few things that you are not sure about it, and how much are they impacting you. It's not just that. Like everything is related to everything.
It's true, and we are all connected by the energy that's this planet. And everyone has their own story. Everyone has what their own struggle, and that's what defines us as individuals. And some people can write it down, and some people can't, or some people find other avenues to express it. Like I like crime books. It's not my number one go-to for reading. And somehow I fell into that genre. But then my idea when writing is, okay, I've got these characters who are in search of a plot. So I kind of know what a book is going to be about when I start writing it, but I let the characters figure it out. And in all of my books, they have to be character studies. Because that's what makes it rich. For me, it makes it realistic. It's the kind of books I like to read. So that's what I write.
And I think a couple of your book titles, they have Spanish names. Like, was it something that you choose based on your family history, or it was more about the book itself, or was it your characters that suggested that title?
The book Dead Dogs was just Dead Dogs, because there's a portion in it that deals with dog fighting. And then the next book was Perras Malas. So there's two Hispanic girls in that book, and I wanted to give this idea, this force of bad bitches, in the sense of like they have to find the strength to do what they have to do in that book. So they are literally bad bitches, but it sounded better in Spanish.
Yeah.
And then Cabrones Perros is straight up a parody of the title Amores Perros, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. But Cabron, because it takes place in Florida, and Cabron is a very familiar term between Hispanics. It could be a friendly term, or it could be insulting. And it rhymed and it went well, and people speak Spanish in the book, so I went with it. I'd like to name things Italian. I'd like to use Italian titles, but it's too pretentious. And in Portuguese, people can't figure that out anyway. So, Portuguese is a language that a lot of people don't read or recognize outside of those countries. So,
you could explore the Brazilian market, which is huge. Though it's like I can tell, like I'm published in Brazil, and for Portuguese, it's very fancy, to be published in Brazil. Because you think that if you are published in Brazil, you're going to have plenty of readers. That's a fallacy. Now, with all the respect for Brazil, like I have a separate YouTube channel with Brazilian guys. I'm actually going to Brazil in September. I've been in Brazil a few times. There are a lot of people in Brazil who don't read books. So it's not proportional to the population. Okay, so I don't know how many people in Brazil, but it's probably, I don't know. It's almost like US, so it's a fallacy, because and then for Brazilians it's very fancy to be published in Portugal, but they forget that Portugal is a very small country, so they're gonna the amount of readers is going to be very small. But of course, it's always nice to be read by others, and especially when your work is translated. That's something I had the honor recently. I had some stuff that was Hungarian, Polish, and it looks great. I hope you same will happen to you, because it's almost like something that was written by you, but it wasn't. It's like somewhere in the middle. So when you read it, I have some knowledge of Hungarian and Polish. Let's say I can pick 2 words out of 10, so I know what it's about, but I don't know exactly what is there. So it's the experience of seeing something that was written by you, but you didn't pick the words. It's fascinating.
I have considered a few of those books translated in Spanish, and having them read in Mexico and Spain. It would be ideal, and I like that. I think that I still think in Spanish when I write, because my sentences tend to be flipped around a bit, and I think that's from that. So, yeah, but it would be fascinating to see my books in another language. And as far as Brazil goes, I have ties with Brazilian people since I was a child. I had babysitters who were Brazilian. I had family who is Brazilian. Spent many Christmases with them here, and the big parties and all that. It's definitely, and I love that someone in the family told me they loved Puerto Rican culture. So like we just got along really well. It was, it's a fascinating culture. I love the films and the music from Brazil are some of my favorites. So
good luck with that. I think it's about finding the right connection. And if you ever read some Spanish elements, I'm sure you're gonna raise some eyebrows, and it's just a matter of time. In most cases, it's about knowing someone, and then everything happens.
Right.
We all know the power of networking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how that's what's gotten me here. The first book was published by a small publisher in North Carolina, and then I made friends in the publishing industry, and they were interested, and I went from there. And in fact, 2 books were published by accident. Peras Malas, I got into a conversation with an editor. I was asking him to send me some books to read, to review. And then he asked me if I had any other books unpublished. I sent it to him, and he published it. And another person, I asked them to edit my book, and they offered to publish it through their publisher. So I got lucky. So
you said that you think in Spanish, and then you kind of write in English. Not exactly like that, but there is there is the 2 elements in your writing. So in terms of your personal life, if you don't mind digging into that, when you dream at this point, do you dream in Spanish or in English? It's something I always ask bilingual people. So I couldn't skip that question.
Sometimes I dream in French, even though I'm not very fluent in French. But I mostly dream in Spanish when I can remember what I dream. Yeah, it's yeah. Usually, wait, did I say Spanish? I usually dream in English. I'm sorry. Sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in French, but mostly in English. So yeah.
This multilingual dreams.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And when it comes to talk to yourself, let's say you are, trying to figure it out what to do that day or when to start writing and just making a decision, would you have self-talk in Spanish or English, or depends on what's the topic?
Yeah, it depends. Mostly I just curse at myself in Spanish. That's always really good because it's more expressive than
I want to say that. Yeah.
So yeah. And
it sounds very different. No, when you curse in Spanish, even if you curse in Italian, French, you have understanding of Portuguese, Spanish is unbeatable when it comes to cursing. Yeah. They are the alpha country. Talking about alpha countries, they are the alpha country. Go cursing.
I never thought of it like that, but yes, I know there's more happening in Spanish and cursing, especially the Caribbean Spanish is a whole other monster. It's a lot like Southern Spain, but and then Italian, you have just like 1 or 2, 3 words that is used for the same thing. French, I know, sacre bleu. It was, which is just you're cursing the Virgin Mary. Okay, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, Spanish, yeah, that's the hardiest form of cursing. Spanish, yes.
Do you use cursing in your writing?
Yes, a lot. In Spanish and English, yeah. I had a family member ask me, he's like, why do you curse so much in your books? I'm like, well, these guys are from the street. They're not going to say nice things to each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I should have thought before asking this question, because if you are mentored by Bukowski and Burroughs, there's no way that there's no cursing in your writing.
Yeah.
It has to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I think harsh language is its own poetry.
Hmm.
It expresses all kinds of things. In Puerto Rico, in Spanish, we have a word puñeta, which is both a fist and a stabbing motion, but it's also an angry expression. It is a happy expression. It's a multiple use. It's a word that has multiple uses to it, and I love that. There's poetry in that, and especially if you can curse this tapestry of things together, yeah, you're winning.
What's your view on the contemporary writing in America and all over the world? How do you see the new generations? Do you think it's about generation or individuals, or how do you see the people who are writing these days?
Well, I have learned by reading and knowing a lot of the independently published writers and even the self-published writers. They still are at it at full force. It's like the beat poets, like William Burroughs, and Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. They were raw in their content. So even though we don't sell as many books as the big publishers do, and not that matters, there's no restrictions to what they're writing. So I definitely go for the indie set. Outcast Press has some great books. $2 Radio has incredible books. The crime writers of today, they're doing an excellent job. Still gritty, still violent, still relevant. There's a thing happening in the horror community. I'm not a fan of horror books. I can't speak for them in that sense, but I know they got things going on. And then you have the big published books. And one thing I am, because as someone who grew up reading Ray Bradbury books or Stephen King books, knowing how these things were edited, it seems that those big publishers and their editors are really falling down. I'm seeing really poorly edited books that are on bestsellers lists. That makes me question the literacy of the writer and the editor, because that's wrong. You really screwed that up. And it's passing by the quality standards. And compared to the editors that I know who sit there and they struggle and they make sure they present an immaculate product, you can really see the difference. So I understand that the big publishers and those big books, they're marketed to different people, different readers, which I think is unfair, because a book is a book. Whether you're reading Judy Collins or whether you're reading, Nevada McPherson, it's the same. The same ideas coming out, but I think the indies are doing it better than most people.
Yeah, I would agree, because I think there's one thing that you have to give to the indies, that they care. They really care. That's genuine. They care about the book from the moment they receive it to the moment it's out there to the public, and even after that, the promotion.
Yeah.
How is it perceived? What can be done? There's a whole process of looked after that you don't see much in the big publishers, and unless it's the 3-5 top writers that they have, and because they matter about for the financials of the organization. But that's a different thing. That's not really about the work. It's just a business decisions. It's fine. I mean, in the end, those big publishers, they are like big companies, which is fine. Just they just need to assume who they are, and some do. Some are very frank. We are not here to do or to produce quality books, but to deliver books that sell. It's an idea. It's a philosophy, and I'm all okay with that as long as that's what they tell. And I think there are a good few like that. What I don't like is when they pretend to be something and they are something completely different. When it comes to the work they do. And in that sense, most of the most of the indie publishers are authentic, and they are not hiding, they are not lying. Though I think that I would only make a critic of the indies like when they say they don't care if they sell, because I mean, of course they do. Otherwise, why are they putting the books
Right.
on the market? It just
Yeah.
matters. It matters. I had a publisher myself, and everyone gets frustrated when you don't manage to have your book read, because the book, by definition, it's a communication, because you are trying to reach out to others. Because if not, why did you put so much effort and time and energy in having that book delivered? It doesn't make any sense. So there is of course people have different stakes, but it's everyone's interest that the book is read. But it doesn't matter if it's for a lot of people. Like, you want at least have one reader, or at least some feedback. Like, there's nothing more rewarding than someone telling that, look, I watch your podcast, I read your book, I listened to your music, I watch your movie. Like, I took 1 hour of my life to know what you are doing.
I think, and you learn that when you get established and people know your name, you're supposed to play nice and not talk about anybody. So I'm not going to talk about anybody, but I will say that the big publishers, like you said, it is about getting a product out. So, you go to your refrigerator, you get out a can of soda. So you go to the bookstore and you get yourself a can of Stephen King, a can of James Patterson. These guys should have retired 30 years ago, but yet it's like you're no longer buying the book, you're buying the name, the brand name. And, that's the difference between the indie guy who nobody knows to the big household name book, books stacked at the airport. So it's, I guess that comes down to the consumer level. So people who want to read interesting, aggressive, transgressive stuff, they'll go to the indies. Certainly. Those who want cozies will go someplace else. And then again, it's whatever the person wants to read anyway. My mom always said, read. As long, it doesn't matter what you're reading. You could be reading trash. Everything from Lauren Sanders to Judy Collins to Stephen King. As long as you're reading, your mind is active in your reading. That's fine. So that was my mom's philosophy to me growing up. So,
is there anything that you are writing at the moment, or anything you are working on that you want to share with others, just to wrap up?
Sure. I have a novella coming out this year with Starlight Pulp Review. It's going to be their first ever novella anthology. So there'll be, I think, 4 or 5 novellas in a book. And my book, it's called The Idiot Caper. It takes place in Atlanta. Will be in there. I have a novel this year coming out through Slice of Anxiety Press. It's called Simmering Dissonance. It takes place during the Black Lives Matter riots that we had, or protests that we had in Atlanta. And then next year, I have an official sequel to my first book, Dead Dogs. So the sequel, Dead Dog on a Highway, arrives next year from Outcast Press. Also, there's some anthologies that have my short stories in them this year. I don't know what happened. 4 short stories published this year. I don't know. So if anybody's interested, they can go to my website, Manny Torres Novelist.com. And there'll be links there to access all of those books.
Yeah, I'll put on the description.
Oh, thank you.
When I release that on YouTube. And that's a lot of stuff. I can just make this comment. That's a lot of stuff that you have on the pipeline. And I'm not surprised, because if you manage to finish it off in a couple of months.
Right. I'm like, okay. Got to reel it in a little bit. Since my first book, I've had this thing where 2 books come out every year. So I'm like, okay, 2 books a year. So. Yeah.
That's some speed. That's some speed. And that's, look, we better close for now. It's a bit more than an hour, but it was a great pleasure talking to you. So
thank you.
I wish all the success for these novels and the ones you are writing now. So We are now in June, so maybe you have another 3 novels. If you go at the pace of 2 novels, 1 novel per 2 months,
Yeah.
for 2025, that's very, very impressive. But
Thank you.
I wish you all the best. And as I said, I'm going to put links in the description. Hopefully, I can manage your stuff to reach to more and more people. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It was great talking to you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.